David Ward, he's been sacked by Tim Farron for his allegedly anti-Semitic remarks. But first, it's the Alex Salmond phone-in. The number to call 0345 6060 973. This may be your last chance to speak to Alex before the election. I suppose we could have him back. Good afternoon. If you lose your seat, it's the last chance at all, isn't it?
Well,
because we don't like losers here.
That would be dreadful, yeah. I mean, but I could go on daily until next Tuesday until Parliament rises, so that people can get a feast of me, then a famine.
You could indeed. Well, let's get it going. 0345 6060 973. First caller is Stephen in Glasgow. Stephen, what would you like to ask Alex?
Hiya there, Alex. How you doing?
Not bad, Stephen. On you go.
Well, basically, what it is, I actually am an ex-SNP member. I joined the SNP like many other folk just after the referendum, and I left the SNP in October last year. What I would say is that the way that I feel at the moment, and many other folk that I know, is I feel a little bit let down by the SNP. What I would say is, with all the sort of a recent sort of scandals that have been happening with, say, Natalie McGarry and Michelle Thompson and so on.
Just to explain, these are two SNP MPs who are standing down at the election.
Yep.
They've had allegations made against them. The SNP, I think I'm right in saying, Alex, withdrew the whip from both of them.
Well, I think that they actually withdrew the whip themselves, obviously under the instruction of the SNP. But what I would say is, the SNP don't seem to have any internal way to sort these issues out. I wrote a letter on numerous occasions to the SNP highlighting issues with my local SNP group, and we never got a reply back.
OK,
so,
Stephen, let's put these points to Alex Salmond. Alex, how can you restore Stephen's faith in the SNP? He's clearly very disillusioned.
Well, I hope I can, but I mean, surely the point is that allegations were made. I mean, nothing has been proven against either of these women, it should be said. Natalie McGarry has been...
Why was the whip withdrawn then?
Because allegations had been made, and the nature of the party is when somebody's subject to serious allegations, as Stephen rightly said, they're encouraged to resign the whip. And Natalie McGarry has subsequently been charged, but hasn't gone to court. But it should be said that in Michelle Thompson's case, that she's not even been charged at this stage. And the point I'd make to Stephen is, whether you think that is right or wrong, it's actually more rigorous than any other political party. I mean, other political parties, I think of those Labour MP, for example, who was charged and went to trial in Glasgow on an assault charge, for example, and still kept the Labour whip at Westminster. And, of course, there's the allegations, and they are all allegations at the present moment, of perhaps a dozen or more Conservative MPs who may face prosecution in terms of the last election, in terms of the expenses scandal. But the Prime Minister has said, and apparently even if the Crown Prosecution Service in England comes forward with charges, there's still going to be Conservative candidates. So what I'd say to Stephen is that, yes, it's unfortunate when people get themselves into trouble, but the SNP's handling of this has been more rigorous than any other political party I know. And surely that's all you can expect of a political party, that when allegations are made, they enforce the rules, and they make sure that when people come forward to be candidates, so that they've gone through the proper process. I'm not quite certain, Stephen, what you would have expected the SNP to do more than has been done.
Well, I suppose for it not to happen in the first place. Maybe your candidate selection procedure needs to be looked at.
Well, then I would argue that no party and no individual is perfect, and those who are without sin should watch about casting stones. But
UKIP have a lot of this, don't they? The European Parliament, where they start with I think they started with 26 MEPs in 2014, and they're already, I think, now down to under 20 because of people who've fallen by the wayside for whatever reason.
Yes, and I've seen dozens of Conservative and Labour Labour MPs go the same way in terms of people who fall foul. I mean, people are human. Political parties are human. You don't judge them in that unless you think there is such a thing as a perfect political party. What you judge on is whether or not the party deals with the issue. And I think, in fairness, it would have to be said that the SNP has dealt with the issue, and 2 new candidates will be coming forward both in both these seats.
Talking of candidates who fall by the wayside, what about David Ward, who we're going to be speaking to after 4:30? He's a Lib Dem candidate, or was the Lib Dem candidate in Bradford East. He was the MP there and had a fairly, shall we say, checkered reputation for some of the remarks he made, particularly on Twitter, about Jews and Israel. Tim Farron has now sacked him as a candidate. Has he done the right thing there?
I think he has done the right thing. I mean, the only question I would say is that it seemed to wait until it came up at Prime Minister's questions today. And this really refers back to Stephen's point. I mean, do you have to actually wait until something becomes a major political issue before you act? Now, to be fair to the Liberal Democrats, there are issues of natural justice. You have to allow somebody the right to defend themselves. But it does look a bit weak when something comes up at Prime Minister's questions raised by Eric Pickles, the Prime Minister incidentally clearly expecting it and saying, well, chum Eric had raised it. And subsequently the chap gets sacked as a candidate. You would think, it looks a bit dodgy if something has to be raised at Prime Minister's questions before action is actually taken.
But this is a bit of a pattern with Mr Farron, isn't it? He only takes action when he's actually forced into it. His comments about gay sex not being a sin, he was forced into making those comments. He's been avoiding that issue for 2 years.
Yes, and he's obviously getting very tetchy about it, as you can see from the television at the present moment. I mean, on this general issue, I mean, I led the SNP for 20 years, and in my younger days, I was expelled from the party, briefly, but nonetheless expelled. Not, I should hasten to add, for falling foul of the law or for saying anything disgraceful or racist or homophobic, but it was a political battle within the party back in the early 80s. And one thing it did teach me, and I actually made a vow that when I became leader of the party, I would never expel or discipline somebody in the party for political reasons. You might do it for other reasons, the things that were spoken about, somebody falling foul of the law, being charged with a serious offence, of course you must. I'm pleased to say, over 20 years, I never took action against somebody for political reasons. Because they were inconvenient, because they were, breaking the whip, or because they were a thorn in the flesh, or because they were appearing on the Ian Dale show and hammering into the party. And actually, I think that's a kind of general rule, but it's wrong to think these things are easy. But I do think that Tim Farron looks a bit reactive in this case. Does
it matter whether we know what Tim Farron thinks about gay sex being a sin or not? I must say I'm slightly worried. I mean, I think it's very... there is a kind of holier now aspect to the Liberal Democrats, which many people notice, they like to be on the... and therefore they kind of get caught out when they sort of say, well, it's not that's my personal view. But, my view, I suppose, would be that somebody, is equipped to be leader of a political party if they're an atheist, if they're a Seventh-day Adventist, if they're a Christian, if they're a Muslim, if they, have a faith or don't have a faith, they should be judged on other things. And what Tim Farron has to watch as to whether his private faith had moved over into issues that the Liberals regarded as party politics. Once you become the leader, of course, you're under a sort of obligation to put forward party policy. So if he does think gay sex is a sin but doesn't actually act on it politically, that's okay?
I thought you were going to say act on it, but act on it politically. No, I don't... I think, he's got himself, two things. One, having got himself into the difficulty he's been in, then, his better attitude would be to say, look, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I was learning as a political leader. I now realise that. This is my view. Ask me about it as many times as you like. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'm now enunciating a different attitude. The electorate can be very forgiving when politicians do admit to a mistake, can't they? Right. Let's go on to your next call. Ranjit is in Birmingham. Hi, Ranjit. What would you like to ask?
Hello, Alex. Do you think the Barnett formula is fair to England? How especially would you justify it to poorer parts of England? Try to be as objective as you can.
Okay, I'll do my best, Ranjit. I mean, firstly, you understand what the Barnett formula is. It was something in European history called the Schleswig-Holstein question. Schleswig-Holstein question. I mean, my pronunciation's dreadful, but luckily I've got Ian here to correct me, of which Palmerston once said that only 3 people ever understood it. I've got the right Prime Minister. One's mad, one's dead, and I've forgotten. Well, the Barnett formula is a bit like that. And even Joe Barnett, in his later years, the late Joe Barnett, I wasn't sure was fully in command of the formula that he introduced way back in the 1970s. And the point is this, that all the Barnett formula does is when there's a change in expenditure, it adds on a population share of that change to England, of the whole thing, to Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. That is all the Barnett formula did. It's just about the change in expenditure. So the actual Barnett formula itself, nobody can quarrel with because it's a population share of the change of expenditure. Now, what some people have argued is, it shows an imbalance of identifiable public spending, very much so in the case of Northern Ireland, in the case of Scotland, and less so in the case of Wales. But of course, what people might well argue, yes, but if you start looking at the so-called unidentified spending, the thing that's lumped together, then that sort of stuff, like expenditure in the Foreign Office, for example, then you see a huge concentration of that expenditure in London, but that's not counted geographically. Now, that doesn't answer your question about the northeast of England, because the northeast and certainly extent the northwest of England have really had the hard edge of this. But basically, it's not the Barnett formula that's unfair. But incidentally, I would do away with it. I would, I want Scotland to be an independent country, and if an independent country, you don't have a Barnett formula.
Annie is in Carnforth. Hello, Annie.
Hello.
What's your question, please?
Well, I just wanted to ask Alex what his opinion is about Theresa May refusing to do a live TV debate. Is it because she's just so arrogant that she thinks that the Tories are going to have a landslide and she doesn't need to, or is it because she's afraid that she might be put on the spot about things like the crisis in the NHS and social care, 1 million people having to use food banks, parents in schools being asked to give money?
Oh, this is a Labour Party political broadcast.
Well, I agreed with Annie. I wasn't going to interrupt any of that. The answer's 3 words, Annie, and that's Sir Linton Crosby. That's the new advisor, Cameron's former advisor, the Wizard of Oz, as he was called, or is called, the master of the dark arts, who has told Theresa May that under no circumstances, given the lead she's got in the polls, must she put it at risk by a television debate, and therefore she won't debate. The second argument, I would say, I don't think Theresa May, who has no doubt many strengths as a politician, is particularly quick on her feet. If you look at even the House of Commons today, for example, and which was pinned on the triple lock in pensions, she is not adept at moving. She's fine when she's rousing the Tory troops for another diatribe directed at Jeremy Corbyn. But when she's pinned on a question, she's not quick on your feet. And one thing you have to be in leader debates is you've got to be quick on her feet. So I think for these 2 reasons, one, she's ahead in the polls, therefore she doesn't have to. And secondly, they're not confident she'll do all that well. That's why Sir Linton Crosby says, do not do it, Prime Minister, and she's accepted the instructions.
I think it's slightly more complicated than that, in that I think he's saying, well, what have you got to win? You've only got stuff to lose, so why would you want to throw away a poll lead by making one mistake in a TV debate?
Yeah, but there's
a logic to that. I don't agree with it
there
personally.
May be a logic, of course there may be a logic, but there's a wider democratic question. I mean, once these debates came in, we've had them in Scotland, incidentally, since 1992. The 1992 general election was the first leaders' debate in Scotland, and there have been every general election.
So as Ruth Davidson said, she will do one at this election?
I'm certain, well, presumably she has, because I know Nicola Sturgeon always accepts leaders' debates, and quite rightly too. But there's a democratic point. These debates should happen. Now, what I don't understand, that in addition to what Annie calls the arrogance of Theresa May, the lack of willingness to subject herself to democratic examination. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn today said he's not turning up either. Now,
he said he wouldn't turn up unless Theresa May did.
Well, yeah, but even so, I mean, his right tactic now would be to say to the broadcasters, I'm going on, I'm here, I want to be Prime Minister, I'll take on all comers, and if the Prime Minister herself won't turn up, you should have an empty chair and advertise the point.
Well, the broadcasters, I think, wouldn't do that.
Why not? Well, they should do it.
I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but all the senior we had Lord Michael Grade on the programme the other day, and he said he thought it would be outrageous if the broadcasters did that. Now, he's a Conservative peer, so you might say he would say that, wouldn't he? But going,
he would say that, wouldn't he?
Well, should they empty chair both of them? And if there was going to be the so-called losers debate, like there was last time, with without David Cameron, and now Jeremy Corbyn says he won't take part.
Just empty chair the bill, absolutely. Okay. And look, you've got to find a way to stop the overweening arrogance of power. And if prime ministers are allowed to pick and choose, if they're ahead in the polls, they're not going to do a debate, then you'll never have these debates. And if you think that these debates have been important in terms of democratic choice, which I happen to think so, then you have to have a sanction on politicians who say, I'm not playing.
But going back to your point about Theresa May not being quick on her feet, when you think that she's going to be negotiating with the EU, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, does that cause you concern?
Well, it's a different skill. I think I've got some other concerns about that, but it's a different skill that's required. The television debate is a skill that you have to be able to move quickly in answer to questions, responding to the audience or the other people, and not get caught flat-footed. Otherwise, it can look like a bad moment.
But if you've got Vladimir Putin opposite you, you've still got to think quickly on your feet, haven't you?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, look, let's take another example. Like Gordon Brown, right? I think Gordon Brown would have been a pretty hefty negotiator in international negotiations, but he wasn't great in the leaders' debates in 2010. And maybe that's the difference. Now, whether Theresa May turns out to be an international negotiator of any standing, perhaps we'll find out in the Brexit negotiations.
Lots of calls coming in. Let's go to Callum in Greenock. Hello, Callum. No, it's Greenock, isn't it? I always get that wrong. It's Greenock. Yes, I do apologise, Callum.
After you correcting me, my European pronunciation. In Greenock. Come on, Callum, from Greenock.
How you doing, Alex? My question is, obviously, with the polls pointing to an overwhelming Tory majority, and the rest of the UK other than Scotland, my main worry is that if Mrs May gets an increased mandate, that she will obviously continue to say that now is not the time for our chance for another say on the future of our country. And my fear is that we're not going to get that say, Alex. And I'm just wondering if you can reassure me that if we can get an SNP majority of seats up here in Scotland, that we will get our say again within the next 5 years or so.
Well, I'm sure we will, Callum, and I'm sure that Nicola Sturgeon will fight the election and saying, let's give the mandate is in the Parliament already. We've got the mandate. And the general election is to reinforce the right of the Scottish Parliament to decide when the time is right for another independence referendum. And if you get that sort of overwhelming vote for the SNP, then I believe the Prime Minister's position will crumble. And I don't care if she's got a majority of 100, 150 in Westminster. It's political reality. It comes to fore, and that's one of the realities that she'll have to face.
Callum?
I was wondering as well, Alex, obviously Nicola Sturgeon has said that the campaign up here is not going to be solely focused on independence. Do you agree with that, or do you think she should maybe have more of a emphasis on another independence referendum within her campaign, or obviously because the Parliament's already ratified it, do you think she's wise to just sort of try and move away from that and move on to other things like the NHS?
Well, firstly, I don't think you should fight a campaign on one issue, regardless of how important that issue is to Scotland. But I think Nicola's right to say that this election will not decide independence, because our whole argument has been that independence should be decided in a national referendum, and the Parliament has the mandate from the elections last year to hold that referendum. So therefore, I think in a whole range of ways, what Nicola will say is, look, you vote SNP to back the Parliament on the referendum. You also vote SNP to back the Parliament on protecting Scottish public services, to back the Parliament and being anti-austerity. So you back the Parliament and the Scottish decision-making across a range of ways. Because you put it, but the way things are looking now, the last citadel of resistance against this hard-right Tory government is going to be in Scotland. And that makes it all the more important that that resistance is strong and determined.
Just on the path to independence, the Scottish Government consultation on a draft bill for a referendum apparently isn't going to be published until after the election, despite the consultation closing in January. Has Nicola Sturgeon got a bit frit?
No, she's looking to get another election victory, which will indicate and support the right of the Parliament to decide these things. And when you've got a general election...
So voters who vote on June the 8th won't know what the path to the next referendum will be?
No, but yes, they will. They'll know that they're voting to support the right of the Parliament to decide on the holding of the Scottish referendum.
But what is that path?
Well, the path is that the Parliament should have the right to hold the referendum through the Section 30 order, and should hold the referendum at the point. There's no debate.
The consultation finished in January, and the Scottish Government hasn't responded to it yet. January is quite a long time ago. Shouldn't the Scottish voters know what the SNP's view is on that pathway to the referendum?
No, because I think you mistake what the consultation's about, Ian. The consultation's about and it's a statutory thing about how you hold the referendum, what the franchise is, how the question will be agreed with the Electoral Commission.
So why doesn't she give her views on that? She's had enough time to sort it out since January.
Because we're during an election campaign where people are going to decide a whole range of things, but one of the things they're going to decide whether to back our Parliament's right to hold a referendum. The consultation's not about whether the Parliament should hold a referendum. They've already decided that a few weeks ago. The consultation's about the format of the referendum to make sure things are fair and square.
So that was January. The consultation closed. We're now at the end of April.
Ian, that's a nothing point. The point is that we're in a general election campaign where huge political issues, one of which is whether the Scottish Parliament should have the right to have a referendum.
It's about plans for independence.
I know I'm going to pronounce this properly. You are what we call in Scotland, and probably in England as well, pernickety.
That's my job as an interviewer, because I don't think your argument stacks up on this. And the reason, I'll tell you what I think.
It does.
I'll tell you what I think the reason is that she's not doing it is because the support for referendum has now dropped to 40%.
Yeah, well,
so she's going to delay it.
Well, several things wrong with that.
The last
sentence.
poll is 40%,
no,
isn't it?
That's not the last poll.
Yes, it is. The Cantor report this week showed a drop in support for independence to 40%, 5 points below the 2014 results.
Right, let me answer you, and don't interrupt this time, because it's quite an important point.
I'll choose to interrupt if I want to.
I see. Right, well, I'll start interrupting you then.
Well, you do it all the time.
The 28th of March to the 11th of April was when that poll was surveyed. Since then, we've had 3 other opinion polls in Scotland, respectively showing support for independence at 49%, 45% and 47%. Some of these surveyed, incidentally, in the last few days, starting almost a month after the Cantor poll started. So you can't call something the last poll just because it was published. The reason that the Cantor poll is so late is because it's a face-to-face poll, used to be called Systems Free. It's part of a consumer survey, and it takes weeks to process the data.
Well,
do you accept that point?
If you're casting doubt on the reliability of that poll...
No.
What about...
Sorry, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's 3 more recent polls.
Okay, no, fair enough.
With more recent polling dates. Now, you know the difference, Ian, so accept the point.
What about the poll that shows you're going to lose 10 seats to the Tories?
Well, let's see what happens in the election. I think we're in the running in 59 seats in Scotland. We'll do our best to win as many as we can. But listen, I'd rather be in the SNP right now, standing for election than any other party, because I think we've got a better chance and more seats than any other party. But you take nothing for granted, and I'm not saying that we're dismissing any challenge from any other political party. We'll take them on.
You spend a lot of time criticising Labour, but it's actually the Tories that are your main opposition in Scotland now, isn't it? A sentence I never thought I'd say.
Yeah, but we spent a lot of time criticising the Prime Minister just a few minutes ago when Annie put in these excellent points across and you wouldn't let her finish.
Do you accept that they're your major opposition, though?
Oh, I think the way the politics are at the present moment, Labour's flattened its back, and therefore there's going to be tough fights with the SNP and the Tories in our range of constituencies.
And what's going to happen in the local elections in Scotland next Thursday? Because I'm pretty sure that Labour are going to take a bit of a tanking.
Yeah, I think, as I say, they'll take a shellacking in a lot of places, and deservedly so, because there's 2 things happening. It's not just a question of rejection of Corbyn leadership and the state of the Labour Party. There's many areas of Scotland where Labour's been in power for half a century, where people have been waiting for the day that they'll have more variety in terms of the political control of the local authority. Right,
let's move on. Alan is in Aberdeen. Hello, Alan.
Yeah, hiya.
Hi, what would you like to say?
Alex, on the after the election, will the SNP support the UK government in airstrikes and drone strikes against Daesh, the Islamic State? As you have been screaming no and asking for inquiries into drone strikes, and I kind of see this as just another form that the SNP are using against Westminster, refuse to even work with Westminster on something as serious as this.
Well, I don't agree with you in terms of our approach to this, Alan. We've been very consistent in terms of action in Syria. And our concern, and that was a concern shared by many people in many different parties, is in the very complex, multi-layered civil war in Syria, you've got to be very careful about military action because there's so many combatants. We've been entirely supportive of the armed forces in the action that's been taking place in Afghanistan and also in Iraq in terms of the strike against Daesh. And I think most people would accept we were first to identify the the importance of the battle of hearts and minds. Firstly, in calling Daesh for what it is, Daesh, a death cult, as opposed to what the BBC still call it, the Islamic State or the supposed Islamic State. Reason being, it's neither Islamic in terms of its pure sense, nor is it a state. It's a death cult and should be called by the derogatory name which is applied across the Middle East. So we've been foremost in saying, look, this is a military battle, certainly, but it's also a battle for hearts and minds. And if we don't place it as that, and if we don't do it as that, then we'll be beset with the same chaos that has followed previous military campaigns.
OK, let's move on to Keith, who's in Bromley. Hello, Keith.
Hi, how you doing?
Fine, thank you. What would you like to ask Alex?
Hi, Keith. On you go.
Hi. It's really just a question about the leadership of the SNP. Is Nicola Sturgeon the actual leader, or is she your mouthpiece and you're still leading it from the back?
No. Nicola Sturgeon's leader of the SNP and the Scottish Government, Keith.
There is a reason why...
I'm the international spokesman at Westminster.
Why
do you ask that, Keith?
Because just after the referendum was announced, Nicola Sturgeon announced the referendum, she made a comment to the Times that Alex asked me to bring it up. And I just thought it was a bit strange why she would say something like that.
Well, I think I don't know the context of this. I mean, I can only imagine it was. But Nicola has a wicked sense of humour, Keith. But certainly it wasn't to allude to the fact that Nicola's anything other than leader of the SNP. And honestly, the one thing I'd say to you
how
is,
often do you talk to her?
Oh, regularly.
Like once a week, twice a week?
Well, we tend to WhatsApp, to tell you the truth.
Do you? Have you got one of these secret WhatsApp groups?
Well, I'm very excited by the fact it's secret.
I'll keep you secret.
But can I say that the first time I did WhatsApp, the reply I got from Nicola was that she was taking a few moments to drink in the fact that I was social media savvy enough to be on WhatsApp in the first place. So as I said to Keith, Nicola has a very keen sense of humour.
So how often do these conversations take place? These fully encrypted conversations?
Right now, I mean, regularly, obviously, because
but is it sort of, Alex, I'm planning to do this, what do you think? That type of thing?
Well, and with very much the emphasis on what she's planning to do as First Minister, absolutely, yeah.
Does she ask you why the support for independence and the SNP seems to be falling at the moment?
Well, I think I'll tell you what, Ian. She's probably been obviously we discussed lots of things, obviously, but if we take the three more recent polls that we discussed there, Ian, the ones actually sampled this month, the 45, 47, and 49% support for independence, they all compare with the 45% support in 2014. Now, in the historic way, I mean, when I became leader of the SNP, independent support was in the 20s somewhere. And when I called the referendum, famously, the most it was in the early 30s. So, in historic terms, that's not low support for independence. That's high support for independence. And secondly, support for the Scottish National Party. If you take the last poll, was 44% for Westminster. Now, we're hoping to do better than that, Ian. But I mean, that's pretty impressive.
That is pretty impressive. But it has actually it has come down, and a lot of people are saying it's because of the way that you're running the health service in Scotland. When you have the chair of the BMA saying that the Scottish health service is stretched pretty much to breaking point, that's a pretty big indictment, isn't it?
It hasn't described it as the Red Cross here. There is a third world disaster area, or the terms that they use. Listen, the best way to measure health service is like for like. A&E 4-hour waiting in Scotland, 92%. Wait a minute.
You actually cut funding to the health service.
No, that's not true either.
It is.
No, it's not true. 92% health service funding has increased in Scotland. The point that Theresa May made to me actually a few weeks ago was, it's not increased as fast as it is in England. Yeah, because we're starting from a much higher base. Spending per head in Scotland in the health service is higher, but performance is manifestly, demonstrably better. In terms of accident emergencies, Ian, a full 10% better. Not just for 1 week or 1 month, but for the last 9 months, Ian.
George is in Paisley. George, what's your question, please?
George.
I will not be voting for independence because I feel the country would not survive as an independent country. Tell me why it would.
Well, I'll tell you, George, I was in the Council of Europe this week and I got offered a badge. It's from one of the Finnish delegates, and they're celebrating the 100th year of independence. They're one of the most prosperous and one of the happiest countries in the world. And if you look at the countries at the top of that prosperity index, then you'll find countries like Denmark, Finland, Norway, countries all roughly the same size as Scotland, some of which, apart from Norway, don't have anything like the natural resources of Scotland. And I would argue a country with Scotland's natural, but above all, George, its human resources, like 5 universities in the world's top 200, for example, the things that really matter in terms of the wealth of a country, Scotland has these in spades and in abundance. And if these countries can be in the world's top 10 of countries of wealth per head, then so can Scotland. And the difference, and the only significant difference, is they're independent countries and we're not.
Final question from me. We've got strong and stable government from the Tories. We have strong against the weak and weak against the strong from Corbyn. What's the SNP's slogan of choice?
Fairness for Scotland as a country and fairness for the Scottish people. That's
I'd say that's a bit long for a slogan.
Well, it's Nicola Sturgeon that does the slogans. So I just advise on WhatsApp. But I think the point behind that is it's not just about independence for the country. It's about liberation of the people and social and economic
taking back
terms.
Control, one might say. Final text. Love listening to Alex Salmond. Can we swap him with you, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
Alex, I'm sure we'll be talking through the election campaign. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much indeed. And hope to see you soon. That's Alex Salmond there. This is LBC. In a moment, we're going to be talking about David Ward, the Lib Dem candidate who Tim Farron has fired. Was he right to sack David Ward for his supposedly anti-Semitic remarks? This is LBC. I'm Ian Dale. It's 4:35 and Rupert Bartia's here with the news headlines.
The Liberal Democrats have banned a former MP from running in June's election after he was accused of anti-Semitism. David Ward's conduct was raised in Parliament following an interview on LBC this morning. The teenager accused of planting a homemade bomb on the London Underground says it was meant to be a harmless